Recently, I was installing shade cloth over my gardens ahead of the extreme heat we'll be enduring before long. When it dawned on me, the task would have been made exponentially easier had I accounted for shade cloth in my initial garden plans. As with all things, there's a learning curve to growing your own food. So hopefully, I can shorten that curve for anyone watching at least a little by delving into my most regrettable garden mistakes and then what I should have done to avoid them. While some of the points here might be a bit specific to gardening in hot, dry climates, some of these suggestions are fairly universal. Also, fair warning, this vid is going to involve a lot more talking and a lot less doing than usual. It's probably no surprise that I'm not the most organized of individuals, and I certainly was not blessed with the methodical and analytic brain of an engineer. So it's in part because of these personality traits and in part due to budgetary constraints that my garden was built piecemeal over the course of a few years. Now, this would have been fine if I had made a master garden plan on day one and stuck to it over the years. Instead, I took a haphazard approach to the project where I threw together a new raised bed whenever I had a little free time and extra money, with little or no mind paid to the functionality of the space as a whole. This caused some problems. For example, the positioning of our chicken pen here makes accessing all sides of our core garden beds an uncomfortable endeavor. These beds here are positioned way too close to the southern fence, and as a result, don't get enough light in the fall or winter to really grow anything. Additionally, my shade cloth setup, while functional, wound up being a makeshift system of ropes, posts, and varying sizes of cloth needed to mostly cover the oddball layout of the gardens below. So what would I do differently if I had a time machine? First, I would have planned out my entire garden start to finish, even if I only had the time and money to work on a little bit at a time. The plan would have factored in how much sunlight various parts of the space receive at different times of the year, and it would have sacrificed some grow space in exchange for more comfortable movement in between the beds. And obviously the chicken pen would not have been built in between the garden beds. Additionally, the garden build would have been designed to more easily accommodate such vertical structures as trellises, shade cloth, and polyurethane frost covers. Prior to moving into our current home here in Sacramento, I had only gardened in northern New England, and even then, only casually. Lack of rain was never a problem back in Vermont and Maine, so if you had to have a raised garden bed for whatever reason, they could be fairly shallow without issue. I found the soil beneath our Sacramento home was effectively one big clay slab. This clay soaks up a lot of water during the winter, compacts, and then dries to the consistency of concrete in the summer. As such, I decided raised beds were the way to go. Here, my first hastily constructed beds were less than a foot deep, meaning the relatively shallow layer of good soil filling them dried out constantly in the summer heat. Further, because the native soil beneath the beds was a dry, clay hardpack, roots looking for water quickly hit a dead end. Needless to say, that first garden did not do well. In subsequent years, I made my beds much deeper. I found that going to a bed depth of 18 to 24 inches drastically reduced how much watering I needed to do, and resulted in plants that were more able to endure the hot weather. While most common garden plants don't need such soil depth when conditions are ideal, many can actually send roots down as far as 4 feet in search of water if the soil is soft enough to allow it. Giving roots more depth was actually a major game changer for us. I've pinned a link in the comments in case anyone is interested in how deep the roots of our favorite garden staples can actually go. In recent years, raised bed gardening has seemingly become synonymous with backyard gardening as a whole, and I myself unquestioningly jumped on that bandwagon. I assume that because my soil is basically pure earthenware clay, raised beds were my only option. Now, raised beds do offer a number of pros. For example, they allow effective drainage, warm up faster in cold climates, allow gardening over poor contaminated soil, and are easy on the back. They're also really expensive. I didn't keep track of exactly how much it cost me to build and fill my raised bed setup, but the price tag is easily in the thousands at this point. Granted, the money was spent over the course of 5 years, and much of the money spent was COVID stimulus money and other little windfalls as they arrived. Now, that doesn't change the fact that raised bed gardening is far more expensive than in-ground. A few years after establishing my backyard gardens, I built an experimental garden bed filled exclusively with our naturally occurring clay soil that I amended with a large quantity of organic matter, mostly in the form of homemade compost. While I did build an inexpensive wooden border around the new plots to keep the excess soil volume and mulch layer where I wanted them, the out-of-pocket cost was less than $50 in the form of cheap cedar fence pickets. Someone with a talent for scrounging free lumber scraps could have easily built such a garden for free. After letting the amended soil sit a few months over the winter, I planted a handful of squash and sweet potato crops in the new bed, and it all did great. In retrospect, I'm wishing that I had built just enough raised beds to grow something over my first season, and then had gotten immediately to work on amending and conditioning the native soil into something arable. I would have saved so much money going this route. I wish I had some photos or video of just how poorly my summer garden did in 2020. The best I can do is say, imagine the polar opposite of what you're seeing here. I had just finished a major raised bed build and had filled them with an allegedly special raised bed garden mix from a local landscape supply company. As a quick side tangent and bonus mistake, don't buy special raised bed soil blends to fill raised beds. Just order topsoil and amend with compost, or be ready to fertilize through your first season. This will save a lot of money, and special mixes are usually just topsoil with a little compost mixed in anyway. So, after building and filling my new beds, my wife and I went and bought a bunch of starts from a local greenhouse, planted them, and called it good. The surface of the soil, left completely exposed to the unrelenting sun, quickly turned into a cracked and dusty mess. It felt like no matter how much I watered, I couldn't keep the soil moist for more than a few hours. Needless to say, plant growth was stunted and yields were almost non-existent that year. The following year, I wised up and put a good thick layer of mulch down before the start of the season and made sure to rig up some shade cloth when the first stretch of hot weather arrived. The difference in garden performance in 2021 over 2020 was exponential. As I mentioned earlier, prior to buying our first home in Sacramento, my only gardening experience had been in Vermont and Maine. In the climate of northern New England, one can easily grow such traditional garden staples as leafy greens, broccoli, beets, and potatoes over the summer. Trying to do that in a parched California valley, however, is a recipe for heartache. I have to accept the fact that I can't realistically grow the aforementioned veggies through the Sacramento summer. Hell, I've found that certain varieties within the same species of plant succeed or fail due to variations in their heat tolerance. For example, take a look at this small crop of lettuce I tried to sneak in before the hot weather arrived. It was mid-May as I filmed this, and it had already started to bolt. When in the initial planting phases of your first garden, do yourself a huge favor and research what grows well in your climate and when it grows best. Talk to local gardeners if possible, and online gardening communities can be a great resource as well. Also, don't assume that because a big box retailer or even a local greenhouse sells it, that it will do well in your climate. Retailers tend to sell the same plants nationwide with little to no mind paid to regional conditions. So this one admittedly isn't a mistake to which I succumbed. I'm stubborn to a fault and will cling to sunk costs like my life depends on it. However, I have seen others have a bad first year gardening and then call it quits. This is fine for those who find they don't enjoy any aspect of gardening at all, but first year failure shouldn't be the catalyst for walking away. It's almost a given that your first season gardening is going to suck. Not only is there a learning curve to growing food, if you don't happen to live atop ideal soil, it's probably going to take a season or two to amend that soil into something that will produce. Good research and planning will obviously increase your odds of success, but like most things in life, success truly boils down to a cycle of trying, failing, correcting, and trying again, leading to a gradual improvement over time. A green thumb is something you earn, not something you're born with. So I hope if any newbie gardeners out there stumbled across this video, you got a little something useful out of it. And until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.